Hi, in today's video we're going to talk about springs. I have an assistant today, or I guess it was pointed out to me earlier that I'm his assistant. So for those of you who haven't met Harvey before, this is Harvey. Harvey, oh, he doesn't like it when I point the screwdriver at him either, so I'll do it this way. This is Harvey. Harvey is our shop mascot. He's also our executive producer of all of our YouTube videos, and he likes to occasionally appear in a video when he thinks it's worthy of his presence. Today's video is about springs, coiled springs in particular, that are used in NuTone door chimes. NuTone door chimes use two different types of springs based on when they're made. The very early NuTone door chimes used what are called extension springs. So an extension spring is a type of spring. It starts off as a fixed length, and the coils can be all tightly wound together, or they can be spaced apart to some degree. And when the spring is put into use, a force will stretch the spring out, and then when it's released, the coils return back to their original size and pull backwards. Think about the type of spring that you would put on a simple screen door. So when you open the door, it stretches the spring out, and when you let go of the door, the spring pulls the door back closed, and it goes bang, bang, bang as it hits the frame of the door, and your mother yells at you, "I wish you kids would stop slamming that screen door." That's an extension spring. The other type of spring are called compression springs. Compression springs also start at a fixed length, but when they're put into use, some force will compress or shorten the spring until the coils perhaps are all the way closed, and when the force is removed, the spring springs back to its original size. Those are the kind of springs we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about compression springs used in NuTone door chime. My journey to learn about springs started many months ago. One of the factors in my becoming interested in springs was that we do a lot of repairs on vintage NuTone door chimes, and one of the key components to any NuTone door chime are the springs that are used inside the chime. To be successful at learning how to repair any item is to gain an understanding of how the item works, gain the understanding of the common failure points in that item when it's, say, perhaps 55, 60, 70 years old, and also to have access to replacement parts to replace the parts that are worn or damaged or lost over that 50 to 70 year period. And the single most common item of a vintage NuTone door chime that gets lost are the springs, and that usually happens because someone takes the chime apart in an attempt to service or repair the chime, and as I've shown in other videos, springs like to bounce off the workbench and then they seem to evaporate and disappear before they hit the floor, and you'll never find them again. So somewhere in the universe there's a pile of lost springs waiting for someone to discover it. To be able to repair the chimes properly, we have to come up with new and inventive ways to try to have the proper replacement parts so we can repair chimes for customers, because the chimes have a lot of sentimental value. Many of the parts are relatively easy to find reasonable substitutes for. End caps for solenoid tubes aren't too bad. I can make new plunger tips out of plastic rods or wood for the really early ones. That's not too hard to do. Most other parts can be cleaned or serviced, and oftentimes other bases can give up their parts as parts units to repair a customer's chime base. But one of the things that's almost impossible to come up with a reasonable substitute for is the spring. And you can see I'm just holding it, and it flew out of my finger and it wanted to fly off the workbench, and that's what springs tend to do. I think I'll hold it like this from now on. So the spring is now on the screwdriver right here, so I won't drop it and won't bounce off the workbench. Trying to reproduce a spring at home or at the shop on your own is a nearly impossible thing. And since there are literally billions of different kinds of springs in the world, and they all vary a great deal from one to the other, finding a pre-made compatible spring is almost impossible, or it probably is impossible. You'll never really find one that's quite right. What I decided to do was have some springs made, because that way we have a reasonable supply of springs, or perhaps it's more than reasonable at this point, but we have springs available to us, so when customers send their chimes in for repair, we have parts available to actually repair them. There are 4 different springs that have been used for NuTone long tube door chimes since 1936, when the very first chimes were made. The very earliest chimes use extension springs. The post-World War II chimes started to use compression springs, and those are primarily the K model chimes. And then starting in the 1960s with the L model chimes all the way up through today, for some of them that are still made, they use a different version of a compression spring. So in thinking about what I wanted to do and how I wanted to go about this, I decided, since the highest number of chime bases that we have customers send in for repair are K model chimes, we're going to reproduce the springs for K model door chimes. And these springs will fit K model chimes from approximately 1946 through probably the end of 1959, or maybe a little bit after that. Harvey was getting upset. He said he wanted to hold the spring, so he's got it now. I hope he doesn't jab me with the screwdriver. He gets a little worked up sometimes. When the decision was made that we were going to work on the K model chime parts first, and the springs in particular, I started to look for, a company that could make springs for me in a quantity that seemed like it would be reasonable, and a company that was willing to work on what initially I thought would be a small order, and then to find springs that were good original examples, that were not damaged or stretched or modified in any way, so we would have a reasonable original example to follow. The journey started off by acquiring means buy, many K model chime bases. And what I was looking for was the springs out of each of the base, and you needed to have a large enough sampling of springs so I could come up with a reasonable average of which springs were the most original. And after many months of buying chime bases and taking them apart for their springs and storing everything else safely away, I came up with a large enough sampling of springs that I could compare one to the next, and I determined that this is our standard, this is our benchmark spring right here that Harvey's holding, that this spring was the very best, most original, non-damaged K model chime spring that we would ever find. And this became our sample for our prototype spring. Characterizing springs is a reasonably complicated thing to do if you're not in the world of springs. So I tried to learn about the different aspects of the springs and the terminology used in the world of springs. Some of the aspects of springs are things like the total outside diameter, the total inside diameter of the coils, the diameter or thickness of the wire that the coil is made out of, how many coils there are in the length of your spring, how long the spring is, how many dead coils there are. Dead coils are the flat coils at the very ends of the springs, the part that the spring sits against or pushes against when it's in operation. There's a lot of different factors. So I looked around, and then I happened upon a company in Kentucky. And the company in Kentucky is called the W.B. Jones Spring Company, and they have been in business for over 100 years. And I filled out their online custom spring request form and emailed it off to them. A few days later, I received a call from them, and they had some questions about the information that I filled out, because for a novice, measuring all of the different aspects of the original spring, they weren't quite right, and when you add the numbers up, not everything lined up correctly. So they had some questions. Said, I have an example of not only the spring that I need to have reproduced, but I also have an example of the device the spring fits into. And this is the solenoid off of a early 1950s K model chime. This solenoid assembly was carefully removed from one of my donor K model chimes, and I cleaned it up just a little bit so it would be an accurate representation. We packed this up and we sent it off to Kentucky. Once the folks at the W.B. Jones Spring Company received my package with the solenoid assembly, they were happy because not only did they have an actual example of the spring that they were going to be reproducing, but they also could see the application for the spring and measure tolerances within the solenoid assembly to make sure that they knew how tight a tolerance their reproduction spring had to be. After a little bit of tweaking to the specifications for the springs, we also agreed that the new springs should be made out of stainless steel. The springs in the solenoid assemblies have to be a non-ferrous metal. Non-ferrous means not magnetic. Stainless steel was the choice because it's a material that they already had on hand, and also it was corrosion resistant. So once we agreed on all the details and the price was finalized, I gave them the okay, and they said they would go ahead and enter the order and place the springs on their production schedule and get them made within the next couple of weeks. At that point, I told them I needed one additional thing from them. I told them that what I needed was 2 one-minute videos of the springs actually being made, because I thought it would be interesting if everyone could see how the springs are actually manufactured. And here's the video that shows that. A few weeks after, they called and said that the springs had been manufactured and the order was ready to ship, and of course all I had to do was pay for it. And he emailed me the videos that he shot. He said it was kind of interesting. I have a feeling that they usually make a lot of larger, heavier size springs than what they made for us. I don't know that for a fact, but that was kind of the impression I got. And he said one of the more interesting parts of the whole project was they had to figure out how they were going to ship the springs to me. They obviously didn't want to just dump them all in a box and mail them. They needed to divide them up somehow. And what they decided to do was they hand sorted them into groups of 100, and then they bagged them up in these plastic bags. So what Harvey's sitting on here is a really, really large pile of replacement springs for NuTone K-model chimes. And there are actually 1,100 springs. Well, there's actually 1,100 less 8, because 8 of them have been used already. So that would give us more than probably a lifetime supply. The original agreement was they were going to make 1,000 springs, but it turned out that during the normal course of production, 1,100 springs were made, so they sold 1,100 springs to me for the price of 1,000. How about that for a good deal? So now I have the world's largest supply of NuTone K-model replacement springs. Let's take a look at one. Harvey's going to have to move out of the way now because he can't be in the shot for this part. He's not happy. As you can see, Harvey managed to get partway in the shot. He says as long as you can see his award-winning medallion, he's happy. As you can see, I have the springs held in place on the ends of 2 screwdrivers because, as we all know, springs tend to roll off the workbench and disappear. So this one, nearest Harvey, is the original K-model spring, and right here is our 2017 reproduction spring. And as you, I hope, can see carefully, they are exactly the same. They are exactly the same length when they're uncompressed. They have exactly the same number of coils in the length of the spring. The pitch of the coils are the same. The diameter of the material that they're made out of is the same. I don't believe the original springs were stainless steel. Probably are some sort of copper alloy or something like that. I didn't really ask them to look into that because it's not really that relevant. We're going to make new springs. We're going to make them out of modern materials. And the number of dead coils are at the end of the springs. These are these flat, tightly wound coils here, and they essentially make seats. So one end sits against the front of the solenoid tube, and the other end, the face of the plunger sits against it. And so those are referred to in this world of springs as dead coils. And they are exactly the same. And so far, I've had 2 opportunities to rebuild 2 K-model chime bases, and we put new springs in because one was missing one of the 4 springs, and the other one, 2 of the springs were badly damaged. They were bent and stretched out. We've decided that since we have a vast number of springs, our policy is going to be need one, get all 4, because they really are an important part of the design of the chime base itself. And one of the things that I've noticed, which I haven't seen on many chimes that I've done before, is since these springs drop in from the back of the solenoid tube, you drop the spring in first and then the plunger goes in afterwards. When you hold the base vertically, the spring is long enough and has enough tension that it holds the back end of the plunger assembly even with the back of the solenoid tube, which is, I think, how they were supposed to be originally. The springs aren't sagging, they haven't been compressed a million times, and the solenoid isn't a third of the way down the tube. And where it sits in the tube is important because it's what generates the force as the electromagnet is energized to strike the tube properly. So if you're going to have 4 plungers and they're all going to hit with the same amount of force, you're going to need matching sets of springs. So the policy is need 1, buy 4, because it's just easier that way, and they're not that expensive. These are not just for our use. That was one of the reasons why I decided to have 1,000 springs made, so I would have more than enough for my needs, but also we can supply them to individuals who want to watch my videos and service their own K-model chime bases. We are going to be selling them in sets of 4. That way you have a matched set for your chime, and if you're going to go through the trouble to clean and service your chime, you might as well replace the springs altogether. If you're in need of replacement springs for your NuTone K-model chime, you can get a hold of us. There'll be our contact information will be down below in this video's description, and you can call our office or email us and we'll work with you to get you the springs that you need. So that's one of the projects that we've been up to over the last 4 or 5 months while we've been working on this. It was to have springs made. How silly is that? But springs are necessary because springs help make doorbells work, or excuse me, door chimes work, because they are door chimes. I hope you found this interesting and helpful. You probably know more about springs now than you ever thought you wanted to. If you did, please give it a thumbs up on YouTube because that always helps. Harvey says, please subscribe. He says, there'll be a banner right up there. Click on the bell and subscribe. Get an email. He'll be in more videos. He says they're better when he's in it. And, you know, he's kind of vain. I don't know. But he's a good executive producer, and he is award-winning. So what are you going to do? Anyway, that's all for today. See you on the next video.